Hello and welcome to Law Matters. My name is Michael Conroy and I am your host as we explore various legal topics that impact the lives of many of us or our friends or families on a daily basis. I'm a partner in the law firm of Hassett & George, a general practice law firm with offices in Simsbury and Cromwell, serving all of Connecticut. This program is informational and is not a substitute for legal advice. Each individual case is unique, and while we hope to inform and educate you regarding general legal issues, I cannot urge you enough to seek competent legal representation if you are presented with a legal problem. Your rights and financial well-being could depend on it. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, or if you would like to request topics to be covered on future episodes, please email us at lawmatters@hgesq.com. Today's episode will be the second of two dealing with residential real estate transactions. Today we will focus on financing residential real estate deals. My guests today will be local mortgage loan officer Joe Gonzales from Simsbury Bank and my partner Lou George of Hassett & George. We will discuss the different steps of the residential financing process. First, my guest today is Joe Gonzales. Joe is a residential mortgage loan originator with Simsbury Bank. He brings over a decade of mortgage experience. Joe specializes in purchase and refinance transactions. He works at the Simsbury branch located at 981 Hot Meadow Street right here in Simsbury. He lives in Middletown with his wife and son. Thanks for being with us, Joe.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Also with us today is Lou George. Attorney George is a founding member of Hassett & George. He has been in practice for 24 years and concentrates in the areas of civil and commercial litigation, real estate and business transactions, land use, and planning and zoning. Lou routinely represents entrepreneurs, individuals, and businesses in commercial transactions, real estate transactions, business planning, and commercial litigation matters. He has tried cases on behalf of plaintiffs and defendants in such areas as personal injury, professional malpractice, wrongful death, and sophisticated product liability litigation. He lives in Simsbury with his wife and 3 sons. Welcome, Lou.
Thank you for having me.
As mentioned a moment ago, today we're here to talk about financing residential real estate transactions. So, Joe, if you could describe for the viewers some of the items that they need to be thinking about before they enter into a deal to purchase a home.
Sure. I think first and foremost is just to have a plan. Kind of have, if it's a husband and wife or whoever it may be, both parties together need to look at their financial obligations and make sure that they're looking at the right possible time to buy a house and have the allocated funds to do so. If they should contact a loan originator. That loan originator will do a couple things. Kind of get a bird's eye view as to what their goal is with this new property, how much they're paying now, things of that nature, and then kind of help them figure out what that number is, what the bank's going to look for to qualify that borrower, and also what's comfortable for those borrowers before they get into buying probably their most intimidating purchase for quite some time. So I think step one is just kind of identifying how much they're going to spend. Some other factors that'll come into play, the area, if they have children, where they wish to kind of have that upbringing happen, whether it be Simsbury or anywhere in the valley, wherever it may be, and for that customer to really do that research. So I think location and then basically having the appropriate finances are the 2 most important things.
And I think with the appropriate finances, you want to be sure you're not stretching yourself too thin and stay within the guidelines. A mortgage originator will guide you as to what really you can afford, and you want to stick within those parameters because things come up through the course of a closing, additional expenses, other issues, and you want to be sure that you're not being stretched too thin and making it a stressful when it should be an enjoyable time. So staying within your parameters as much as people would like to always get that little extra, staying away from that is sometimes a good thing in the long run. We've seen that.
Now,
Absolutely.
Joe, what about credit issues that might pop up, and what role, if any, does a loan officer play in trying to work through any credit issues that might impede the financing process?
Absolutely. When I meet with a borrower, we ask a few questions, income, things of that nature. Then I ask permission to pull their credit. So all the banks, what they do is they specifically look at FICO scores. So I'll pull the credit, I'll go over the credit with the borrower. If there's some room for improvement, I'll advise them on, hey, this may be a flaw, this may be a flaw, and give them some steps to either repair it, or if it's something that's ready to go, I take that credit score and it allows me to basically give them a rate. So the credit score does impact the rate, absolutely, and also how much they can put down. The higher the credit score, the better the rate, the less amount that they would have to put down.
How long does it take to repair a credit score?
Depends on the flaw. It could be a retailer, that could take anywhere from 60 to 90 days. If it's something with a past property, maybe a foreclosure or something like that, it could take a little bit longer. So my biggest advice is that the credit bureaus are the ones that actually have to fix that error, but the borrower, the consumer, is the one that actually has to initiate that process.
Okay, so it sounds like in terms of making sure that you can get the financing you're going to need at a reasonable rate, you probably want to start the initial application process and the credit checking process pretty early on.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Now, what's the difference between pre-qualification and pre-approval?
Sure. At Simsbury Bank, what we do is we take that borrower from beginning to end in the process. So when I meet with a potential borrower, I take a full application, I pull their credit, and I ask them up front, as they wish to move forward, for all of the appropriate documentation, so W-2s and pay stubs, 2 months of bank statements, asset information, copy of their driver's license, things of that nature, to put all together so that when we do submit the file, it is a complete file. Then what happens is, after the appraisal comes in, the underwriter will issue an approval. That approval is basically going to have minimal stipulations on it to close the deal. So why I get into that detail is I don't offer a commitment letter or a pre-approval. I offer a pre-qualification letter. So some of the banks will call it something different, but at the end of the day, the document that matters the most is essentially twofold: the pre-qualification to say, here's the type of house that you can afford, here's the monthly payment that you can afford. And then that doubles as, when the commitment letter comes out, now here's what it's going to take for us to complete the funding of your home.
Okay. So a pre-qualification letter will kind of aid in the house hunting process.
Absolutely.
That shows prospective sellers that your purchaser has the financial...
has met with me and has the financial wherewithal to purchase the home that we've spoken about, and the creditworthiness as well.
Okay. And that helps on the strength of an offer. If someone's bidding with someone else, another party, for the same property, the strength of the offer, not necessarily just the price, makes a difference when the seller's looking at it. They want the deal that's more likely to occur. So having those pre-qualification documents and letters are very helpful.
Okay. So, Joe, you've worked through any credit issues with your prospective purchaser and provided them with the pre-qualification letter, and they've found the right property, and they're under contract. What happens next?
I'll ask them to gather all the appropriate information. I'll have them sit with me in my office. It takes about an hour. I'll go through the full application process. Within that process, I will have taken the application. I will have locked their rate. On that next day, that next business day, the file actually gets submitted into processing to start the ball rolling.
Now, you mentioned that you would have locked their rate, right? Are rate locks typical throughout the various different types of financing?
Absolutely. They occur on every single loan.
Okay. And what's the typical rate lock period?
Sure. For a refinance, it's 45 days, and for a purchase, it's 60.
Okay. So once that rate is locked, they've got about 60 days to close on the transaction?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Which is a very important point when they're actually signing their purchase and sale agreement or offer. Many people become anxious and want to move into the home right away. They found the one they want. The closing date that is stated within a purchase and sale agreement has to have a realistic time frame to provide proper time for the underwriters to completely underwrite, review it, and get all their documents in line so that it's cleared to close. And we can't close a loan until the lender has cleared it and then provided the documentation. And many times you run into an issue where the closing date might be a little closer than the lender may need in terms of getting things accomplished. And there may be a hiccup here or there within the underwriting process where the borrowers have to provide some further documentation. So within a purchase and sale agreement, there is a closing date. That is, unless the term time is of the essence is within the document, it is a reasonable time within which to close around that date. And I think some people don't understand that. That date is on there, and unless you put the term time is of the essence, it is a reasonable time. However, even though it's a reasonable time, if it's a purchase and sale, you run into issues of movers. If there's another pending closing, so if the house that is being sold, those sellers have a house they're purchasing, there's a cascading effect. If one is delayed, then others could be delayed. So putting the realistic time frames, speaking to the mortgage originator as to how long it will really take, really is helpful in closing it with proper expectations.
Okay. Now, Joe, take us through the actual application process, if you would. Once the mortgage is, once the purchase and sale is signed, you've identified the house,
Right.
And that's when the real application process really kicks in.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay.
Absolutely. So I've done some pre-work for my borrowers to make sure that they would qualify for this house on Main Street, if you will. The sales price fits within the realm of what I put in the pre-qualification letter. And now the agent has gotten a signature from the buyer side and the seller side. So I then have an appointment with these borrowers. They come into my office, and basically I have them, I give them a little laundry list of things to bring: the W-2s, pay stubs, bank statements, all the appropriate documentation. And we go over work history, income. I go over their credit again just to make sure nothing's changed, and basically fill out that application. From there, I print it out, and then I go over some disclosures with them and submit it to underwriting.
Okay. And where's the underwriting actually taken care of?
It is on 760 Hot Meadow. So we're one of the few banks that are within a mile from each other as far as operations and the branch. So it's very convenient.
And what sort of things are the underwriters looking at during that process?
Sure. Well, the process itself starts with the processors. So what they do is they go over the documentation, make sure the dates are okay. When I ask for information like pay stubs, they have to be dated within 30 days. So I ask for recent information. The processors are there, basically the first line of defense, to make sure all the information that I have provided them and that they've provided me is accurate. Once it passes their test, then they aid in basically ordering an appraisal. The appraisal has to get ordered for whether it be a purchase or a refinance, as that's the bank's measure, if you will, on what the value of the home is. Once that appraisal comes in, then it goes to the underwriter. And now the underwriter is double and triple checking the income information, making sure the debt-to-income ratios work, making sure the value came in for the home, and things of that nature. And then when they put it all together, they come up with basically an approval, a commitment letter, if you will. And it may ask for whatever's missing. So if it's a pay stub that was dated 32 days ago, they may want a recent pay stub. Verbal verification of employment, which is a phone call on our side to make sure that that borrower is still employed where they say they are. And then, really just a signature from the borrower saying, hey, we're going to move forward with the purchase or the refinance, whatever it may be.
You mentioned a term a moment ago that I think the viewers would be curious to hear more about: debt-to-income ratio. Now, that's a key component of the underwriting process.
It is.
Right? Explain briefly, if you could, exactly what the debt-to-income
Sure.
ratio is and what underwriters are looking for.
Basically, the calculation of the debt-to-income ratio is essentially what comes in versus what comes out. So if I look at net income, which I do on every borrower, then when I pull their credit, I take a look at what their debts are. So I add up everything that they owe on their credit report. And then I factor in that new mortgage payment with taxes as well. So I basically divide the two numbers together, get a percentage rate, and that percentage rate has to be below 42%.
For all debt?
For all debt.
Okay. How about, is there a separate percentage that's looked at for underwriting purposes in terms of the amount of the mortgage to
Years
income.
ago, what they did is they still have it, but it's not weighed as heavily as it is. There used to be a top-end ratio which just incorporated their, and it looked at their initial debt, and then the back-end ratio which looked at the debt plus the housing expense. Now we just look at the back ratio. We look at all components together.
Okay.
And I think that's an important point. As I mentioned earlier, 42% of your net income
Right?
should go towards these expenses.
Absolutely.
That's including the house. So all your expenses plus your house, which is something I think any individual that's getting into this process can do their own math
Sure.
to some degree and begin to get a realistic picture of what they can afford on a month-to-month basis for a mortgage along with their other expenses.
Absolutely.
Now let's talk for a minute, if we could, about the various financing options. I mean,
Sure.
They're fixed, they're 30-year fixed, 15-year, they're adjustable rate mortgages. Talk about the pros and cons of the various different options. If you
Sure. I find generally for, let's say, a first-time home buyer, someone who's not used to incurring that debt for that long of a time, I generally put them in a 30-year fixed. The 30-year fixed is the lowest payment that we would have based on the fact that it's amortized over 360 months. So a lot of people will fall into that realm. That is the most common loan that we have. The next bucket, if you will, is the 15-year. And I find that population to be more on a refinance transaction where, you know, that borrower's been in that mortgage for a few years and wishes to kind of pay it off a little bit sooner with the rates being as low as they are. Then we also have a 10-year as well. So that's kind of more of a fine-tuned, you've got someone maybe with 12 years left, they want to go down to 10 years because the payment's going to be about the same from where they are. And I find that I'll kind of cater that towards how that borrower, sorry.
Those are the fixed rate mortgages?
Correct, those are all fixed, forgive
Okay.
me. We don't really do anything with variable rates. The only variable rate example that I would have is like a home equity line.
Right.
So we call it a piggyback loan. It essentially allows the borrower to draw on the equity of their home and make a payment, an interest-only payment for, essentially it's a 10-year term where they can pull and push. That's their draw period, if you will. So they can take monies out for the better part of those 10 years. And then what happens after the 10 years? It gets amortized into a 20-year mortgage.
Okay.
So that's where the variable part will come in those first 10 years.
Talk, if you would, for a minute about PMI. What
Sure.
is PMI?
PMI stands for private mortgage insurance, and what that is that's any borrower, whether it be a purchase or a refinance. So any borrower that's looking to lend above 80%, which is the threshold of what that appraised value is. So in theory, if you have a first-time home buyer that's looking to put 5% down, mortgage insurance will come into play because they're borrowing 95% of what that asset is. So clearly above the 80% threshold. Mm-hmm. And then essentially what happens is the private mortgage insurance companies, they will charge a rate, if you will, a monthly payment that is essentially assurance for them. And that number basically depends on the credit score and the loan to value. So anything above that 80% threshold will trigger mortgage insurance. And that payment is derived from, as I said, the credit score and how much above 80% that borrower is, whether it be on a refinance transaction or on a purchase.
And that private mortgage insurance will stay in place until such time as they've reached the threshold of 20% equity.
Correct.
In the property, which you can reach in a couple of ways. One, and the most widely used approach, is the principal being paid down. And they will tell you how many months you have. You can see that, and if you make those payments, or if you run into money, you want to make further principal payments, it'll happen more quickly. The other way, and not quite in this economy, is the value increases, and you can get it reappraised, and there's a process for that. So there are a couple of ways to reach that threshold, and then you don't pay that monthly premium anymore.
Okay. Joe, explain for the viewers, if you would, how points work and what their impact
Sure.
can be on the rates and the cost of the transaction.
Sure. In this day and age, the rates are very low, so I find that I don't I don't have many borrowers at all that'll pay points. Basically what it is, a point will equate to 1% of the loan amount, and it'll buy down the rate by an eighth. So if it's $200,000 mortgage, 1 point is $2,000, it'll bring their rate from, let's say, 2.75 to a 2.625. And we can manipulate the numbers to see what the savings would be if it's worth that borrower putting that money down to reduce that rate. And it'll be on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. And typically, it'll take a period of years for the borrower to realize the savings.
Correct, to pay that back,
Exactly.
Absolutely. So my question would be, when anyone kind of comes and asks me about points, is I really want to understand how long they look to stay in the house for.
Right.
And then we kind of craft the solution that way.
Okay. Now, guys, let's talk about some of the various issues that can come up during the application process that would impact underwriting. Some of the maybe inspection issues,
Sure.
some of the red flags that you typically see.
I think one of the biggest ones is the borrower losing their job. That's kind of a rough one. So that income stream kind of goes away,
Yeah,
and then
it
you
could
get the
impact
call,
things.
and it says, hey, things have changed. Another thing that could impact is if there's new construction. A lot of times the borrower has kind of a laundry list of things laid out that they wish for the builder to do prior to closing. Keeping in mind that there's that time clock that's ticking within the purchase and sales contract and the rate lock. Sometimes that doesn't always happen. So the builder may come back and say, hey, this can't get done or this can't get done. And that may impact the decision from the borrowers to say, well, we had a deal and these things weren't met, so they may go elsewhere.
One of the issues that you've mentioned a couple of times are the appraisals, and we always recommend and like to see within the purchase and sale agreement that someone state there are other conditions, a paragraph of where you can put other conditions that the house appraised at or above the sale price. And we like to see that for the reasons that Joe has mentioned throughout our discussion here. The other one that is important when you talk about the purchase and sale agreement and affecting underwriting are inspection issues. And when buyers look at the house, they like it, but they may not know all the nuts and bolts and issues with it when you have an inspector go through, which we highly recommend, and that's a contingency within the due diligence period. You want that inspection to notify you of the problems. However, when that occurs, there's an issue of how that's going to be paid and who's going to pay that. And you can, some FHA mortgages don't allow credits to be on there. Some lenders will allow credits up for the closing costs, but repair credits are usually not allowed. So with regard to inspections and credits, it's very important to have a good understanding of how those are going to be accomplished, because it does affect underwriting. And sometimes you may have to go back through the underwriting process, again, delaying that closing date if there isn't a good, consistent resolution between the seller, the buyer, and the lender. They have to work together with regard to potential issues. And inspections are very important in that regard.
So if you run into one of these delays, that can blow up the rate lock, right?
Absolutely.
What happens then?
It's
Back to the
on
drawing
a
board?
case-by-case basis,
Right.
but generally back to the drawing board, see what that current pricing is.
And is that a situation that you run into with any frequency?
It's happened before. It's happened before, sure.
A lot of times I think there are ways to work out some of these credits that a buyer may get as a result of a new roof that has to be put on or some major repair.
And that's typically taken care of in terms of closing credits.
Closing cost credits, some will allow it. Some won't allow anything, and you have to have that repaired ahead of time and pay for it, and it can't be on the settlement statement. Some will allow it on the settlement statement, so each lender's a little different.
Great. That's all the time we have for today. We hope you found the show helpful and informative. This program has been intended for informational purposes and is not a substitute for legal advice regarding your particular situation. From all of us at Law Matters, thanks for watching.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.